Hi, yes, you got it. This lecture or speech is about guns, or more specifically, gun control. If we allow the government to control the guns, they will eventually control every other aspect of our lives. So, this is important. There are a variety of guns available today. Actually, there's a whole lot of them made by many different manufacturers in many different countries. This is a display of some of what I have. These are handguns, some knives. This one's a tool as well. This is what would be called an assault rifle by many. I use it for hunting and home defense. And this is a 30-06, which is a hunting rifle. The smallest one is a 380. It's not really good for home defense, but if you're on the business end of it, it'll scare you. A really large person might not be affected by this. This is a 9mm. This is almost ideal for home defense. It'll stop just about anybody. Probably not good if you're up against a bear or a rhinoceros. Of course, the tool, I use this on the job, at home, everywhere. This is just a regular folding buck knife. This is one of the smaller ones I have. This is a Super Black Hawk. It's a 44. This, many of you will recognize, is an AR-15. This is the modified version that was done after the ban in '96. It is not automatic. It can only shoot one bullet at a time. Pull the trigger once, one shot. This is a very powerful hunting rifle, one of the most popular, 30-06. It's good for either close quarters or for long distance shots. The American Revolutionary War, most people think it was about taxes. What many do not realize, it was not so much about taxes. As a matter of fact, in the initial Bill of Rights, which there was 10 of them, there's nothing about taxes at all. Taxes were not mentioned until 1913, when Congress decided they should pass a law they can tax us and anything as much as they want. That's still in effect and has not been pared down or regulated. The war was mostly about censorship, ownership of guns, dictatorships. England had sent over an army to enforce police actions because of the taxes that they raised that were actually a ridiculous amount, very high percentage-wise. What made this most famous was the Boston Tea Party. You may not realize it, but there is a revolution brewing right now in the United States. Our forefathers saw, as did the British monarchy at the time, that sheep are easier to lead than wolves. Our forefathers wanted wolves, whereas the British wanted sheep. It would be much easier to lead that way. As I mentioned earlier, the British had sent over armies to enforce police actions. The laws were pretty much non-existent in the American colonies. We did not have the same rights and privileges as the full-fledged British citizens that lived in Great Britain. Now, in reference to the actual guns, there's always going to be bad apples. There's going to be bad apples in anything, not just with guns. The most prolific killings in the United States are not done by guns. One very famous example would be 9/11, which probably everybody out there should be aware of. Another would be the Oklahoma City bombing. There were no guns involved in that at all, in either one. The Oklahoma City bombing was basically things that are or were readily available. Fertilizer. Certain components of fertilizer make for a very good explosive. They have been extremely regulated since then. Banning guns completely is only going to increase crime. Some people are going to say, oh, Australia banned guns, but Australia did not ban guns. They passed laws that basically require licensing and training and permission to purchase them. There are still very, very many guns in Australia. And within that country, each state has its own set of rules that the federal government outlined, but most of those have not been implemented as of yet, which has been more than 20 years later. Even if they were completely banned, I have skills enough and the knowledge to make a crude gun literally overnight. It wouldn't be a machine gun, wouldn't be real accurate at long ranges, but I could do it. And I know people that have machine shops and other tools and equipment that could probably make a very nice, sophisticated gun in about the same amount of time. So, if I was to be a criminal, the fact I couldn't go down to the store and buy a gun would probably not slow me down. It's just the way it is, unfortunately. The drop in the suicide rates of Australia and the murder rates provides some questionable, maybe not quite tangible ideals to their philosophy. I believe that most of this is because generally as a country, the people of Australia are more honorable and trustworthy than those in the United States. I have friends in Australia. I've been there. I've kept in touch with some of them for many, many years. That just seems to be a trait that they have, that we used to have in the United States, that I believe went away in the 60s. There's no perfect solution to this problem, but certainly complete removal of all the guns from the public will come to no good. This is typically a liberal agenda where they would probably like us to revert to communism, with only the very wealthiest, maybe 1%, if that many, people of the United States that would comprise a ruling class, so to speak. And the rest of us would all be subjects. I expect that if this happens, our tax rate would probably be around 100%. We send all the money we make to the government. They would get back with us in the form of a welfare check and make sure that everybody got the same amount of money and that we had bread and unclean water to drink. Yes, this would happen. It's a power trip, and especially people that have been in power in Washington, D.C. for a long period of time are more likely, I believe, to favor this type of action than if we rotated them through on a regular basis with term limits. That's probably the only, that's not probably, that is the only way. The communism, which is what that would be amount to, it's been tried before on a grand scale with Russia. And I think a lot of us in this class at this particular time are old enough that we remember at least something of the Cold War. I served in the Army during that time. I know what it was about. I was not very far from Chernobyl when it blew up, and yes, I was scared. I know it wasn't a military action, but being that close to a radioactive source of that magnitude, that scares you a lot. I also got shot at by Muammar Gaddafi and his group from Libya. I didn't actually take any bullets or bombs or anything, but that's scary. It really is. He had been a friend of ours, but when the Iron Curtain fell, unfortunately, the rest of the world did not step up. So we got rogue nations, and we have plenty of them today. Another good example would be Arizona. I actually lived through this. I was in Arizona for quite some time during the 80s up until the late 90s, and actually up until 2002. Pardon my selfie stick, this is only my second time with it. During the mid 90s, we basically got invaded by California and Illinois, and they brought with them a bunch of their liberal politics. Prior to that, gun control in Arizona was the fact that you could hit what you're aiming for every time. It was good gun control. When they came, the laws changed. You couldn't openly buy and sell and carry guns anymore, and crime became a much more prevalent problem. We had few, if any, gang problems before that. So I guess the liberals take a hit on that. There's no doubt about it. The only place you couldn't carry prior to that was federal installations, courthouses, and bars. Those all seem like they have a good reason behind them, and I will not argue against those. The federal installations, but the courthouses and bars, definitely there have been precedents for why you should not have a weapon in there. Chicago, LA, a number of other cities have a pretty high gun death rate. Chicago is there. There's two trains of thought on that. One is the rate per 100,000 people. It's a percentage. It's a bogus statistic. Completely useless information. They have about 700 to 900 deaths a year over the last 20 years attributed to guns in Chicago. If you look up the statistics under rate, they come in perhaps around number 15. But they're still the highest as to the overall number. If you use this rate quota, the town where I live in, Berea, North Carolina, population around 1,900. In 2010, we had 2 incidents of murder-suicide. One was a woman murdered by her boyfriend, and then he turned the gun on himself. And another one was out-of-towners, 3 people. A man turned the gun on another man and woman, I don't know the relationship, and then killed himself in public in full view of many witnesses. If you do this rate thing that we speak of, that puts this little town, Berea, for that year as the most deadly city in the world, because our population of 1,900 with 5 deaths, the rate would have been about 270 deaths per 100,000, almost 5 times above anybody else. All the citizens of the U.S. would benefit from gun ownership. When they realize exactly what the Revolutionary War was about, and what some of these other wars were over, Hitler banned guns for everyone that was not a member of, quote, the party. And that made it very easy for him to continue his agenda and enforce it. Nobody in Germany had guns, and very few people in the surrounding countries, which were generally poor, had guns either. Idi Amin, even though he was about the same time, it was the same thing. Get rid of all the guns except for him and his military, and then run rampant over the land side. Guns are not the problem. People are the problem. Cars kill more people every day than guns, by a long ways. Number 1 on the list is heart attacks. Cancer is number 2 or 3 on the list. Guns do not even make the top 10 list. The citizens of the U.S. will have to act together as one. We need to enforce this by getting rid of the lifers in Congress and giving them term limits, and have real people in making our laws. California just recently passed a law banning handguns by ownership by everyone except for the state lawmakers. Now that seems like there's a big problem right there. So if that's any indication of what the possible future for the U.S. might hold, then that's going to be a problem. With a certain amount of regulation, licensing, and training, we can make this society safer for all, especially if we all have guns. that would not be a problem. My sources are from bbc.com, an article by Katie Beck, thetrace.org, an article by Anna Boyko-Weyrach, and the CDC.gov website, National Center for Health Statistics.